can I?
You're okay with that, Jennifer?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. I'll just wait a little bit longer for some more attendees, and then we are recording the session today too for those who are unable to attend.
I can see Hugh Durrent Whyte online.
In the interest of time, let's get started. And good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session on turning ideas into jobs, accelerating R&D in New South Wales. Appreciate your attendance. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of all the lands we meet on today, which for me, based in Melbourne, are the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I also pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend my respect to the Indigenous people of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island peoples around the country, wherever you may be. Thank you for joining us. Today's session is meant to be interactive, so there'll be opportunities to ask questions. We're also recording the session for those who are either not able to attend or you want to revisit some of the content. So that's available for you as well. We would appreciate it if you could put your questions into the Q&A panel so that we can pose those to our speakers towards the end of the presentation. So thank you very much. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce your host today, who is Amanda Swan. Amanda, in her day job, is the Strategic Account Executive for New South Wales Public Sector for Databricks, and she also is the Deputy Chair of the New South Wales Council as well. So we thank you, Amanda, for your commitment to the AIIA and also for hosting today. So I'm going to hand over you to do the honours, and then we'll hear from our speakers, and we'll conduct a short Q&A session, and that'll be our process and procedure for the day. So thank you. Over to you, Amanda.
Great, thank you, Ron, for that introduction. And firstly, I just wish to acknowledge the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of these lands on which we gather and I gather today, and show my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'm excited to be able to represent the AIIA New South Wales Council for today's event, as well as hearing more about the plans for R&D investments to generate future jobs and industries in New South Wales. And we have two exciting speakers today. So our first speaker will be the Honourable Gabrielle Upton, who is Parliamentary Secretary to the Premier. Gabrielle was re-elected for a third term as the member for Vaucluse at the March 2019 New South Wales election and was appointed Parliamentary Secretary to the Premier. Gabrielle previously served as Minister for the Environment, the first female New South Wales Attorney General, Minister for Family and Community Services, and Minister for Sport and Recreation. As Parliamentary Secretary to the New South Wales Premier, Gabrielle's been tasked by the Premier to lead this recent initiative to accelerate R&D in New South Wales. Gabrielle had begun her career as a banking and finance lawyer at Freehill, Hollingdale and Page, and then worked in corporate finance at Deutsche Bank and Toronto Dominion Bank in New York. She served as Deputy Chancellor of the University of New South Wales from 2006 to 2009. And Gabrielle also has a BA LLB from the University of New South Wales, an MBA from the Stern School of Business at New York University, and is a Fellow of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. Our second speaker for today is Professor Hugh Durrent Whyte, who is the New South Wales Chief Scientist and Engineer and Commissioner of the National Natural Resources Commission. From 2016 to 18, Hugh was Chief Scientific Advisor to the UK Ministry of Defence. And from 2014 to 16 and 2002 to 10, he was a professor and ARC Federation Fellow at the University of Sydney. He was also CEO of the National ICT Australia, as well as Director of the ARC Centre of Excellence for Autonomous Systems and of the Australian Centre for Field Robotics. Hugh is a world-leading authority on machine learning and robotics and applications in the areas including cargo handling, mining, and defence. He's published over 300 research papers, graduated over 70 PhD students, and has won numerous awards and prizes for his work, including being named 2010 New South Wales Scientist of the Year and 2008 Engineers Australia New South Wales Engineer. He has worked with many major companies and has co-founded 3 successful startup companies. So very excited to introduce the 2 speakers today and looking forward to hearing more about this new action plan in New South Wales. So I would like to hand over to the Honourable Gabrielle Upton to continue. Thanks, Gabrielle.
Oh, thank you, Amanda, and also to Ron, to Bridget, to the board of the association, to welcome my colleague Hugh Durrent Whyte, who is a distinguished engineer and scientist, and who I've been working with for 2 years. So as a bit of background, we had a session with your board going back about 2 weeks, I think, which was really, really good. And so the opportunity to have your feedback and build your awareness of the 2 particular initiatives that we were raising for discussion today was too good to resist, I've got to say. And having had a look at who's on the line, we've got members of government from the bureaucracy, we've got people from Amazon, we've got consulting firms, we have a range, I suppose, of participants, which represents the breadth of your membership of the association. So thank you to Amanda and to Ron. Amanda, do we have 30 minutes or do we have an hour for this session?
So Ron, I think we have a total of an hour, is that correct?
Yes, we do have an hour,
yes.
Gabrielle. So.
Okay, thank you very much. That just helps with planning of time. Also wanted to acknowledge Jen from my office who's on the line, who will switch to a video, but a little bit of context. So before we go to that video, which really frames up probably the most significant announcement we have made related to the R&D Action Plan, is an investment of close to $100 million that the Premier announced in last month, which is to build an R&D translational ecosystem for RNA related technologies. We have an excellence in the various fields of research that can contribute to building our state as more of a centre of excellence for the early stage ecosystem, and then go on to build an industry from that in RNA biotechnologies. So we'll play that video, but again, just before I go to that, this work started about 18 months ago when I said to the Premier, and Hugh has been my co-collaborator through that time, I believe that the state has every reason why we can have more of our great ideas in our community, in our universities, in our startup hubs, in our scale-up hubs, become the new energies and the new industries of the future. And so in the way that we have a very deep and long committed investment in hard infrastructure, in our roads, in our schools, and our hospitals, we should have a deep investment also in our economy of ideas. But not only the ideas, in actually making sure that they are mobilised and they become capabilities which will then build our new industries of the future. And the reason for that is, of course, that we know that high tech and complex industries where the capabilities are just emerging now are the ones that build sustainable jobs into the future and will actually help our economic prosperity as much as our social prosperity, which is a point that my colleague Hugh makes all the time, of course, having had experience of working in overseas jurisdictions. So our action plan was launched by the Premier in January, and it has 5 key priority areas. It talks about what is it that the state can actually do that the federal government can't do to create an economy around ideas in New South Wales. And it was headed and guided by an eminent group of individuals who came together in the advisory council, headed by David Gonski. There were people who would be known to you, thought leaders across the ideas ecosystem, vice chancellors, venture capitalists, people who sit on boards, the chair of CSIRO. So a group of incredibly experienced and diverse individuals who guided the action plan, which, as I said, was launched in January of this year. To date, we have over $60 million invested in the priorities that were called out in that action plan. And they go anything from a program that was launched just recently, a small business innovation research program, where the idea is that one of the economic levers that the state has, which is our procurement spend, we're using to solve the problems of our agencies. So discrete problems that they want solved. And instead of them going to market for an off-the-shelf product, this program, as I said, that's been successful overseas, drives an innovation, a new product in collaboration with the agency to solve their problem. And the SBIR program then ensures that the people who come forward with these ideas get the support, the finance, and the curation of their ideas to solve that problem, also with the idea that that technology that they offer up to solve the problem could then be taken to market beyond government procurement. So that's just one of our 5 priorities. Quickly to go to one of them that is actually a part of today's consultation. We have, for the first time, the workup of an R&D roadmap. We know that we haven't done this before. This is seminal work, and it is to chart what capabilities we need to back, because either we have comparative advantage or we need strategically to back to guide our investment internally and to guide our activities inside of government. But not only that, we need a roadmap over a 20-year period to then guide investment that we're going to attract in the state. Another great announcement we had back in March of this year was the setup of Investment New South Wales, which is our economic development agency in government, a first in the New South Wales government, where R&D New South Wales and the work that Hugh and I do and his team sits, but it also includes trade, other parts of investment attraction, Study New South Wales, the 24-hour economy. So it really is a bringing together of the economic drivers of our New South Wales economy, and it sits in the Department of Premier and Cabinet at the centre of government. So we'll talk about the R&D roadmap, which is really important. And then secondly, we'll talk about something that we framed up in response to feedback we got, predominantly amongst startups and scale-ups, where they said, you know, we would like more visibility of what is available across the innovation ecosystem. We'd like to know where our mentors could be, where researchers want or have ideas that might solve business problems that we know exist, where we know where research infrastructure is. So a piece of visibility across our state as to what might assist create this innovation economy that we're building through the R&D Action Plan. So we'll come back to talk about the matchmaking platform to create that visibility and what we're doing around it as well. But first, we should go back to the announcement on the RNA pilot manufacturing facility, which, as I said, is kind of like the totemic announcement that we've had, both in terms of quantum and a real statement about what New South Wales will do in terms of building our future industries around RNA biotechnology. So, Jen, if you wouldn't mind playing that video, it only goes for 2 minutes and then we can get started again.
We've learned a lot about mRNA and RNA vaccines, and they're really a game changer. So not only do we need to invest more in those technologies to fight COVID-19 today, they're also going to help us future-proof our communities against future pandemics.
Our Accelerating R&D in New South Wales Action Plan is supporting the capabilities for future industries and growing new jobs and our economy. We have more top universities in New South Wales than any other state. We have more startups in our innovation ecosystem per capita than any other state or territory, together with the fact that we have a skilled economy and labour force here.
New South Wales is known globally as the Asia Pac hub for biotech and smart jobs. We have the track record, capability and financial capacity to deliver complex health-related infrastructure and are committed to supporting businesses locating in New South Wales.
We have 11 state universities in New South Wales, 4 of whom are the top 200 universities in the world. In addition, we have 19 health research organisations. The CSIRO has major labs in Sydney, and of course we have the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation, ANSTO. The universities have come together to build an RNA alliance. This brings together the strongest and the best researchers in RNA and related technologies into one organisation.
This combination is going to drive our New South Wales medical technology and research industry. It's going to help protect the health of our community now and into the future.
Well, thank you, Jen. And now, Ron, I'd like to hand to my co-collaborator here, Hugh Durrent Whyte, our Chief Scientist and Engineer, to provide an overview, and then we might go and I'll let Hugh help facilitate the discussion around the 2 initiatives that are out for consultation today. Thank you, Hugh.
So I might focus in on the 2 initiatives we're going to be talking about here. The first is around the 20-year R&D roadmap, which, as Gabrielle said, is one of the key supporting recommendations of the Accelerating R&D Action Plan. The way we want to try and do this, or the way we have been doing it, is we're trying to gather a lot of evidence about where, for example, investment is being made in research, where investment is being made in startup companies, and where new companies are being created, and also the investment of larger companies in these areas. And really trying to understand, I guess, where our comparative advantages are. We've broken it down into, if you like, a matrix where we have sectors, so clearly things like agriculture, health, construction, that sort of thing. And also along the other axis, technologies, of which clearly digital is a significant part. But there are also areas like materials and bio and so on. And you can imagine, if you like, that those intersect at different applications, for example, digital agriculture. And it's at those intersections that we really want to try and understand where we have strengths, where perhaps we should prioritize investment and so on. Particularly for this community, we have a very, very strong digital background in New South Wales. I'm sure you're all aware of this. Something like 60 to 70% of new companies in this space are in the Sydney Basin and more broadly in New South Wales. There are lots of applications which are really growing very well: digital agriculture, robotics, defence, applications in mining, in construction, and all these sorts of areas, as well as, of course, the service sectors, so fintech, regtech, a range of different areas. So digital is very high up our agenda, and certainly the initial data says that at present, the bulk of research expenditure in Australia in the digital sector is actually spent in New South Wales. And in some areas, particularly things like robotics, something like 3/4 of it is. So we are very strong in this space. And what we're really looking for, I think, from the audience here is, I guess, some input into where we might think these areas could be in the future. What are the sort of foci we should have? Potentially, input into what an action plan around particular sectors might look like. You might be aware that we are looking at things like we have funds like the Physical Sciences Fund, where we do early stage funding of companies so that they can be invested by private equity. We've also got, as Gabrielle mentioned, the SBIR program, where government is the first customer and where it's a government defined problem, and really, again, to try and help businesses accelerate along a development curve. And we also have other programs, including emerging industry infrastructure, where in the early stages, at least, we're focusing on things like semiconductors. So again, a lot of overlap with the AIIA community and a lot of sort of focus around, where these emerging sectors might be. So the way that we're proposing to put this forward is we really want some input, I guess, from the community around where they see their future businesses going, and what sort of research and what research translation needs to happen, and also particularly what sectors they may be in, and how therefore the government can support the translation of research out of universities and other research organizations into new economic activity and new business activity. Gabrielle probably talked enough about this, but the matching platform is an important component of this to some degree. Again, I work quite a lot at the interface between universities and the venture capital community, the entrepreneurship community, particularly around places like Startup Hub. And one of the big issues that we genuinely face is often we have really, really great ideas, but the problem is we don't really have the right people to commercialize them. You know, so we'll have some new technology, some great idea, but in the end, who's going to write the competitive advantage, the business case, and actually drive that company to develop a successful product? And conversely, we're often asked by entrepreneurs, where is the research happening in particular sectors? And so the matching platform is really designed to kind of bring those components together. Still not quite clear where exactly we're going to focus in that area. Should it be around just government components? Should it be around a particular tech sector? Should it be a particular concierge function? Should it be a proper full-up digital platform? Again, we're interested in hearing, I guess, views from the community in those areas. So those are the programs. I'll emphasize what Gabrielle said. You know, this is I think, arguably the first time in New South Wales history where we've really managed to align, I think, the politics of it with the economic need of it, with the research drive of it, and all those sorts of pieces coming together to, I think, really changing the landscape that we have here in New South Wales and indeed in Australia in general. So this is a really opportune time for an organisation like AIIA to really drive, I think, what could be on the right agenda for what the New South Wales government would like to achieve. I'll stop there. I think you're on mute, Gabrielle.
Yeah, look, thank you very much. So Ron, back to you. Jen will be sharing the PowerPoints that we have. And Jen, could you bring one of those up? If we turn first to the R&D Roadmap, you've heard Hugh talk about the seminal work that this is, how we've put a hypothesis up to test people's thoughts, and the importance of this in government in terms of both guiding activities, investment inside government, of which we have about $480 million per annum on guesstimate, and then, of course, our internal attraction of external investment into the government. So Jen will bring that up on the screen, the PowerPoint, and then what we need to do is take you probably to the matrix that Hugh has briefly mentioned and just use that as a bit of thought starter on. So Jen, is that nearly up?
That's what I suggest, Gabrielle, that if you can navigate us through the PowerPoint deck, which is now come up on the screen, and take us to the points where you need us to be, and then we'll talk about that once you've navigated us through the plan.
Okay, now you can see there and the industry landscape, of hypothesis about where we have capabilities to build our future industries. So really between Hugh and I, Hugh will guide this discussion. It's really to get some response. This represents, I suppose, our thinking on verticals and horizontals and where they may intersect, where indeed we'll need to focus and build 5-year plans.
Sorry, Hugh, were you going to talk to that grid?
Yeah, although I'm really open to input. I just wanted to point out that I think the areas of interest for AIIA are the top rows, which really talk about AI and data, sensors, advanced computing, robotics, and again, the applications that we see right across the top, as you can see there, you know, aerospace, financial services, and so on and so forth. And where I guess people think, you know, new technology, research translation is really genuinely going to have an impact here.
Just for our viewers, if I'll just navigate you around a little bit. There, between the slide and the images of our speakers, there's a little crosshatch there that you may want to expand your screen on to enlarge. And also on the left side, you've got the magnifying glass if you want to zoom in further to each of those pages, and you can scroll through. Now, as you can also see on the grid, there's some significant, there's a significant number of areas where you can respond to and talk to. but you've also heard where the priorities are. Happy to open up to questions which you can post in the Q&A section if you have any specifically on any areas. I guess my question to you both, Gabrielle and Hugh, is I've also posted the links to the questionnaire in the chat area there. What in particular are you looking for from industry?
So the types of questions we've been asking and getting answers for is, in your business area, what are the genuine research challenges? Are they around, I'm just making this up, but things like trust and privacy? Are they in areas, allied to new types of computing? Are they allied to, I guess, physical infrastructure or, the implementation of those in particular sector areas? Where are the challenges? How would you like to see those addressed?
And the best way to get that information to you outside of this session?
There is a questionnaire, and the questionnaire has, a follow-up button as well, and we do follow up on those sorts of things. Again, we're forming an opinion at this point of where different sectors are really seeing, the types of challenges they want. And look, again, we've had a few conversations in the IT space, and certainly a significant number of companies here they're not at the cutting edge of research, but they are big users of the technology. Once blockchain or encryption methods or any of these sorts of things come out, they're good users of that. But some are. So again, we come across companies that really are at the state of the art in terms of, let's say, image processing or spatial data fusion or some of the other areas. And we're really keen to try and understand, I guess, what would help those companies progress in terms of specifically research translation, rather than, I guess, the levers we don't have, which, are federal government things around, IP incentives and so on.
And I think that to our members, for everyone, both on the call and we've already spoken to, we've already communicated much of this through our connector magazines as well and our EDMs, but to those who are viewing the video as well, this is a true consultative process, and there's a real opportunity for us to provide information. The other thing I might add is that as Gabrielle's already suggested, that she's spoken to the board, and the AIIA board is very, very supportive of these initiatives. So we'd like our members to get behind this and provide the information that'll help not only Hugh and Gabrielle and their works, but the state and the state of New South Wales and the project and the plan as is. Hugh, you also mentioned the comment around commercialisation and the challenges you've got there. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that, and again how it is we might be able to assist as both an association as well as an industry?
Yeah, look, it's been trotted out so often it sounds a bit trite, but we have a whole group of really world-class universities in this state and world-class researchers, and particularly in the digital area, lots of successes, but we don't seem to be awfully good at translating those into, economic outcomes, if you see what I mean, more broadly. Trying to be careful here about the way I state that. So I don't just mean startups, but I mean translation into existing companies that are in the digital space specifically. So, the whole R&D acceleration thing is really about research translation. That is not funding basic research, but trying to support mechanisms that would actually allow that research to genuinely be used by existing companies, but also to drive future industries. So, if you look at the programs that we've initiated already, SBIR would be a good one. It really is, so that stands for Small Business Innovation and Research. And it's where the government basically have a problem. You put out a call for a group of companies that could solve those problems, and I'll come to what the current round are in a minute. And so in effect, you're funding companies to generate new and innovative solutions, ideally drawing through research to solve a known government problem, where the government itself is the first customer, right? And that's kind of important for particularly small companies to have. And they span areas like the use of new drone or digital technologies for counting koalas, for example, or the new Hyperloop navigation work that transport are looking at. So there's a number of areas like that. We put out a significant call earlier in the year, and we got, I think, something like 60 or 70 companies applying for that program. So I think that's a good example. But we're also interested in the future industries. So like I said, we have an emerging industries fund, and that really is designed to kind of bootstrap industries that perhaps we don't yet have, but could be ones that go into the future. mRNA is an obvious example at a scale, but in the AIIA space, there are things like the new Semiconductor Bureau that we've just gone through an expression of interest round. Again, we're not big on semiconductors in Australia, but we are big on companies that use a lot of semiconductors. And indeed, when we ran the expression of interest round, we had well over 100 companies come into that, really looking as to how we could form that, how we could help them in the design process, how we could help them in the supply chain process, and also things like engaging with global foundries and so on. Other areas where are sort of also emerging, there's been a lot of talk recently about the quantum computing world, or quantum sensing, quantum devices. On Monday, we opened the quantum terminal at Central Station. It's got a lot of new companies in there, as well as attracting significant overseas companies. We have some of the strongest universities on the planet in quantum in this state. We funded the Sydney Quantum Academy to make sure we got the skills and so on. And so the issue is, a lot of companies are now looking at, well, this is coming, so what quantum algorithms are we going to be using, whether you're in financial services or whether you're in geological modeling and so on. So we genuinely want to drive, I guess, that translation into existing companies, into new companies, and indeed into businesses and industries that don't even yet exist.
So here I'll pick up on a number of comments you made then. Firstly, it's refreshing to hear you talk about the strengths and potential gaps from our education sector. We would argue that as an industry association made up of commercial entities and private organisations, that we are probably the best at assisting organisations to commercialise. We do that with the startup community. We do that with the young entrepreneurs coming through the system, and we'd be more than happy to engage with your education institutions as well in assisting with that. Private enterprise is good at commercialising. Good example there, you just mentioned quantum. We have been negotiating and talking with the federal government and a number of state governments as well around setting a national agenda for the quantum technology, but also the commercialisation of both quantum and AI. We know that it's a $300+ billion industry if we can commercialise this correctly. So I think there's a real collaboration opportunity in those two areas alone. We know that there's significant opportunities in both of those spaces. I'm sure you'd agree.
Yeah, well, the industry landscape picture you see in front of us is really trying to expand that, right? It basically says, what are the opportunities? The opportunities, I'm just picking it out here, of sensing in areas like, mining, construction, digital, and so on. And of course, there are really interesting companies in that space now. And indeed, we fund some of them, right? So what are the opportunities in that? What are the opportunities in robotics? And again, that's my background. And my old lab spun out 12 new companies in that area, which are genuinely really been very successful. What are the challenges? They are in environment, they are in agriculture, they are in mining, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we want to get really quite specific about what are those areas that we genuinely should be going after, okay?
Absolutely. I saw a first-hand example of how robotics can play an important part. Took my daughter out for a birthday dinner the other night, and the restaurant was struggling with getting additional staff for the hospitality, and they were using robotics to bring robots to actually bring the plated foods out to the waiting staff. I couldn't help but take some video of that. I thought that was terrific use of a combination of people and robotics. I do encourage people to post their questions. John Friskin has asked one. Could you expand on what you see in digital education, please?
So I have the view, I think, that digital education now has got to be, applied to every discipline. Do you know what I mean? So I was lead in trying to establish a Digital Sciences Institute at the University of Sydney and the UTS and other places. And a big part of that is, frankly, we need proper digital, and by that I don't just mean programming, I mean, understanding of things like statistics, machine learning, AI, in everything from the humanities to law, and all the way through all the science disciplines, and all the professional areas. It's not just a geekdom world these days. Everyone needs to know something enough about it. And you can see this again in the industry landscape. Every sector that we talk about has genuinely got a significant element of digital technologies in it. And I mean, this is in the field. But then the question, around digital education is, how do we make sure people genuinely understand what is there, what is possible, and also the limitations? One of my personal pieces, Gabrielle will laugh at this, is we overuse the word AI, right? Most AI is just, statistics. And we need to make people understand that, AI is not necessarily a frightening thing. It's actually, a force for good in many cases, and we can do things that we have not been able to do in the past. And make sure that lawyers understand that, and everyone kind of understands that. So I think that's important too.
Well, I think with the we've been very vocal around the AI component for some time, because it actually is an industry that can create a significant number of jobs and create a number of opportunities, but also perhaps do some of the more mundane things that people don't necessarily want to do in their jobs, to allow them to do more interesting things in their roles. But also on that question from John, whilst we have a government that both New South Wales government and federal government have stated quite clearly that the digitisation agenda is important, the digital literacy is an issue, and I don't think people fully understand what digitisation means. And it's not about putting businesses online; it's a lot more than that. So I think your point's very valid there.
Yeah. Look, in the
Ron,
other area I see it a lot, which I think is important for your community, is in the more traditional, what I think of as engineering roles. I find a significant poll I have is often really ensuring we do proper digitization in areas like mining, or in construction, or in the areas that I think of as traditional engineering are being transformed through the use of digital technologies and digital analytics and so on. So I think, again, when you talk about digital education, digital is now very much a horizontal, it's not a vertical. And we need to think about how it applies in those areas. And digital, it's not more than even digital literacy. It's, how do we use that digital technology to genuinely change the game in all these business areas?
So, Ron, I just want to say we brought up the consultation questions as a bit of a thought starter for your membership on the R&D roundtable, because I'm conscious we're at just after 11:10 now. Yep. So to help frame any informal feedback together with the survey, which I know you've distributed to your members, there are those 3 questions there. So, particularly pertinent to your membership group, what are your businesses investing in? I know we've got people from AWS, Salesforce on the line. Where do you think, as a state, not as a nation necessarily, because we're jealous about what we're doing here in New South Wales, are our existing competitive advantages? Both of those businesses I mentioned, of course, being global businesses. And, where should we be developing competitive advantages? And this is the one that is more framed up, I think, by the government's view of where we need to play to be in part of the supply chain of critical industries. And Hugh mentioned the emerging Industry Infrastructure Fund, for which we are shortly to invest $4 million to building up a strength we have in relation to the semiconductor supply chain, which relates to the design of semiconductors. Being knowledgeable of the fabrication or manufacture of them is something where sovereign nations have major plays and have built their industries based on that kind of more commodity-based business. So we're looking, and we will, under that 3rd question there, would be very interested in where, together with the issues we've seen come out of the COVID pandemic, where clearly vaccine and related technologies that are going to provide further therapeutics in health have become a priority of the nation probably wouldn't have been going back 2 years ago. In the semiconductor space, we said there's a role for us to play, as well, I suppose, in defence industry. So we haven't come to a confirmed conclusion around number 3, but we welcome, because we have some international businesses and their membership online, what they think about where that strategic capability might need to be built up, as opposed to where there is existing competitive advantage, which is more in question 2. With that, I thought maybe we should just quickly go to the presentation around our matchmaking platform. And then we have a similar set of questions at the end. I think these are turning out more to be thought starters for your members on the line, which is really good to bring awareness. And we are asking for feedback through the surveys till the 10th of December. So there's about 10 more days or 9 more days to do that. Yeah. I'll just get Jen to bring up the...
Gabrielle, while you're doing that, if I can just jump in there, I think some of those points you just raised, and you talked about the input from organisations. I've asked Amanda to jump back on, because given Amanda's experience and background, she may be able to talk to some of those questions as well.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Look, Gabrielle, I think, and Hugh, some really interesting questions and observations coming out of there, because I know, coming from the industry side, we're always looking at, the broader ecosystem and what are some of those advantages in New South Wales as a sector. And it is really refreshing to see that you're looking at some of those sectors that, probably haven't been developed a lot in New South Wales, but by actually joining up some of the big organisations with the university sector, as well as, the really vibrant SMEs in New South Wales, it could be quite exciting to see some of what comes out of that. I know from my side, I'm really interested to hear more, definitely, about the matchmaking platform. It's something that we've talked about, not necessarily in this context of R&D, but how you bring together all of this ecosystem of ideas, skills, people, knowledge, and what you're thinking that might be a little bit different to make this type of platform work as well in New South Wales.
Thank you very much. On point, great segue to our next PowerPoint. And again, we can share these with your membership. I know they were circulated to your board, but if they weren't circulated further than that, and just the links to the surveys, more than happy through you, Ron, to have these circulated. If I could have Jen pull up the matchmaking platform. I think Hugh and I kind of laid the premise or the concern that we had expressed to us quite consistently, both at the Advisory Council level and amongst our startup community, for a way to have more transparency around what the research and problem-solving ideas ecosystem was in New South Wales, and where they could find support, money, and awareness of problems that need to be solved. And the government has a kind of dispassionate, community-based motivation in doing this, rather than a business motivation. So the premise that we would be in a good position to be able to do this. So you'll see some slides on the matchmaking platform. We might slip forward to Hugh might want to talk on the functionality and the way that we've approached this. It's a complex product to deliver in a way that will have longevity, that will have purposeful content, and provide some functionality. So I'll hand to Hugh immediately, but the only other point I would make is that where we've come to in our thinking in designing this is to take a finite use case, so we can work up its veracity and viability and test that. And so to choose a part of what it might address as so many areas of disinformation, or maybe that's not the right word, but a lack of transparency across the ecosystem, and make it very purposeful, make it quite narrow, but test its functionality and its benefit in the way that we hope to produce through this concept. So maybe, Jen, if you brought up the questions at the end, just so people are mindful of them in the time we have remaining. And I think they're on page 11 again. They may be earlier in that slide pack. And then maybe to Hugh to kind of talk through how we are trying to purpose this so it has the veracity we seek it to have.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, we are pretty clear what we would like as an outcome, which is an ability to connect research sellers with research buyers, if you like. That would be the ideal way of making it happen, and really bringing together, I guess, research excellence and commercialization excellence to create good outcomes in that sense. That's what we would like to do. I will say it's harder than we imagined initially, because, you know, exactly what the boundaries on that aren't that clear. And so focusing it on a particular sector, I think, is interesting. The other thing that I think is very important to say is there are many systems that look like this out there, right? And we do not want to spend money replicating what's already there. So we certainly have in mind running, I guess, a minimum viable product process where we might contract 3 or 4 or 5 companies to, I guess, show us what they can do in this space before taking it down a particular road. And there are, I mean, the issue is, you know, is it any different from just everyone putting their wares online and looking at each other, or is it a properly curated process, or is it a proper other algorithms that genuinely try and match things together? And, you know, what's the scope of the entrepreneurial piece? Is it business? Is it investment? Is it, and so on and so forth. So really trying to understand how those sit. I will say where we're down to now is, I think the need to genuinely have a concierge function, that is to allow to really moderate how things come together. And secondly, to really probably focus, as I said, on a subset of areas, arguably around the sort of priority areas that government currently have, because government does have a role in funding some of those, and work on basically trying to deliver something, at least for that area in the first instance, and then growing it out of that. I think we're very keen to kind of get something up and running, and really understand the impact and effectiveness and where we should actually be committing resources. Like I said, whoever does this, we're not going to design and build this internally, I'll tell you now. You know, it's a question of really trying to get someone external to build what we want for us, and amongst all the particular offerings there might be, if that makes sense.
Can I
Makes perfect
just ask
sense.
a question? Is that okay, Ron?
Yes, sorry, I was going to say it makes perfect sense, but over to you, Amanda. Yes.
Yeah, and look, following on from the whole matchmaking side, I'd be interested to know, and I'm sure that our AIIA members from industry would too, because we've heard a lot of information recently on the procurement reforms as well, and being able for, you know, not just SMEs, but any organization to be able to promote more of their services, their ideas, etc., on a particular platforms to make it more visible to government as well. Are you looking at connecting these types of initiatives up across government somehow?
Yeah. Again, we have a very sort of early version of this on what's called the Waratah Research Network page. So the Waratah Research Network is basically a network I chair, but it's the, if you like, the research people across every department in the government, plus the universities, plus CSIRO, and so on. And we all come together and share stuff. And if you look at the web page, there is, for example, links to, you know, government programs or government opportunities in research which are being funded. And also there is a links into, for example, you know, where universities reckon they have all their areas of expertise. So it's not moderated in the sense that we were just talking about, right? But it does provide a platform in which information is available to people, both from a buyer's point of view and from a seller's point of view. So there are elements of it there already, okay? And don't get me wrong, I mean, there are, you know, we're aware, for example, of the CSIRO marketplace, you know, where again, there are, you know, where the CSIRO has expertise, which is properly curated, and where there are potentially opportunities to engage externally. And that's a good one too. And you want to be able to link that kind of information in. And it may be that, you know, and we're also aware of other commercial companies that offer a similar kind of service. Although I have to say, none of them kind of quite do what we were thinking of. You know, they're either an ability of researchers to just upload their ideas, or, you know, a marketplace in which people say, you know, I'm a lawyer or I'm a business person or whatever. The matchmaking piece is often missing. In fact, always missing.
which is critical.
Yeah.
Gabrielle, were you going to say something? Sorry, you're on
Yes,
mute.
just to Amanda's very good point, it is a parallel piece of work which the action plan called out, that there should be an innovation procurement stream that not only sat on the books as a policy by a procurement board, but was actually executed against. And I think that goes to sometimes a broader issue in government of hesitancy, I suppose, about taking measured risk in procurement, which can lead to the creation of businesses and future industries. And we were always reminded of that by somebody who sat on our advisory council who said, you know, I sit here now as a successful entrepreneur, now venture capitalist, because someone in government saw my product, which was more innovative than others on the market, and took that small amount of risk. And from that, now there are X amount of jobs and GDP that's been created, or GSP created from that. So there is work, as you're probably aware, Amanda, going on in that, which we have backed in and supported. The piece that has not, so there's been in summary, announcements around procurement that will prefer small businesses in certain kind of procurements,
Yep.
Particularly around the digital cyber space, led by my colleague, Minister Don Mello, who's the digital minister. The piece around a procurement policy that specifically calls out innovation and works a little bit like the SBIR program that Hugh spoke to and I spoke to earlier on, that is funded under our action plan with $28 million, to have that work more systematised across government. Our existing innovation procurement, which looks a little bit like the SBIR, is currently being reviewed with our input in mind. So just to say, watch this space. We recognise that that's a really big way in which government can drive innovation through our procurement dollar, as much as through our precincts, with citing innovation activity in certain places and letting everything happen that happens there when you get people together, and curating those places, which comes back to Hugh's point about Tech Central, which we launched with the Quantum Terminal yesterday, which gives a real focus and locality to a digital capacity in New South Wales, which we believe to be world-class.
Thanks, Gabrielle. A couple of comments on that as well. So we've been running our iAwards program now for some 30 odd years, and we've had the significant support of the New South Wales government for that program. Many young entrepreneurs and startups with their innovations come through, and actually I can see where there's alignment matching up with your table, the grid there, in terms of some of that innovation coming through. I think if we work with your department, with your organisation over the next few months as we prepare for the 2022 program, there may be some benefit to come through some of that. I've been involved in Minister Dominello's task forces around the procurements for the ICT as well, so I can have a first-hand. I can relate to it firsthand in terms of what's trying to be achieved there, and we've been very, very supportive of that as well. As we draw to a close, I just want to put some actions together. So the action on AIIA here is that we will continue to disseminate the information you provide to us and encourage people to partake in the survey. At the conclusion of this event, once the video of this recording is rendered and live, we'll send out the link to the video. We'll send out the 2 PowerPoint packs again for people, as well as the links to the surveys. We'll provide that to our members. We also, for those of you who are on the call, the Connector magazine will once again feature this. So again, prompting for people to respond, and the opportunity is there to do so. Back to you, both Hugh and Gabrielle, in terms of what happens next after the feedback, after the 10th, what's the process after that, and what should we expect from you beyond the 10th?
I might fill in there. We are planning to pull together pretty close to a draft in the early new year. So we are then going to actually, I guess, consult on that, particularly through what will be a comparative advantage summit. So looking at how that works with senior people from industry particularly, and on the back of that we will basically write the final version of this. But it won't stop there. I mean, the first thing is anything like this needs to be a live document, needs to be updated as new technologies come along. The second thing is, and I think the slide was brought up a bit earlier, we have a program of turning, I guess, those priority areas that we come up with into action plans. So if we genuinely are going to focus on, I will pick digital agriculture as an example, you know, how do we genuinely start supporting people, you know, companies and research in that area to be translated? You know, should it be through appropriate industry funding? Should it be through government really start looking at procuring technology in that sector? Is it around infrastructure, etc.? So there'll be specific, very specific action plans associated with the priority sectors that we end up with. Again, I'll emphasize, you know, there has to be a lot of flexibility here because, you know, things change significantly in relatively short spaces of time, as we know in our sector.
Before I throw to Amanda for a vote of thanks, Gabrielle, anything else you'd like to add as final comments?
Just thank you to everybody for turning up today. Please, before the 10th of December, at the very least, provide us with feedback through the surveys, both on the matchmaking platform and the R&D roadmap, now enhanced by what will be the PowerPoints that you'll have access to. And to thank you, Ron, and your board for working hand in glove with us on this over the last month. So with that, thank you for your time, and to Amanda for hosting.
No worries. Look, on behalf of the AIIA New South Wales Council and other AIIA members and guests that have joined today, just want to thank you sincerely, Gabrielle and Hugh, for sharing more information on this action plan. And I know I've already gone and looked at the survey in the meantime, and I'll be completing that as soon as we finish today, and I'd encourage others to do that too. So thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Hugh. Thanks, Gabrielle. To our members, very, very clear message. There's not only an opportunity to participate and engage here, but there's a commercial opportunity that follows through this. So very much encourage you to get engaged. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Yes, thank you.